Benji, do you want to pray for us?
Yeah. Dear Father, we are grateful, Lord, to come together, Lord, and to learn what it means to be united, Lord, in spirit. Lord, I pray that we would each come to you first. Lord, that we would first tithe ourselves to you, Lord. That we would, Lord, make our commitment to you first. Lord, and that we would be able to see with open eyes, Lord, the things that you desire us, Lord, to lean into. Just thank you for this time, Lord. I pray that you would bless our hearts in it, Lord. That you would continue to open up our understanding, Lord, and our willingness to be a participant. Lord, that we would see these things as not things that can be applied to our life, but Lord, as real things. Lord, and that we would learn to be disciplined in our thinking. Thank you for this time, Lord. Amen.
I think we're on 1434.
Yeah.
I would be curious to know if you guys had any further thoughts about this one, because we did look at it together a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
1434.
In our other class. We can have Leda, if you want to read the first part of it, and then Isaac can read the second.
34?
Yes, that's right.
Someone asked, what do you think of saying, require injury with kindness? The master replied, with what then would one requite kindness? Requite injury with uprightness, and kindness with kindness.
The initial quoted phrase appears in Laozi. How do you say it? Laozi? Laozi? I just wonder if there's actually like a... I think it's Laozi.
Yeah, it is.
Chapter 63, and Confucius' response is certainly anti-Laozi in flavor. But it was likely a traditional saying, not necessarily identified with Laozi itself. As He Yan notes, or how do you say that one again?
Duh.
Here is used in the more archaic sense of kindness, and it's possible that 1433 and 1434 were paired together because they both used it in something other than the standard Confucian sense. The point of 1434 seems to be that the order is brought about through proper discrimination. Each type of behavior has a response that is proper to it. Injury should be met with sternness, whereas kindness is to be rewarded with kindness. Failure to discriminate in this way is an invitation to chaos. How do you say that name?
Hong Kong.
Is it? Huang Khan. As Huang Khan notes, the reason that one does not repay injury with kindness is that were one to do so, then everyone in the world would begin behaving in an injurious fashion, expecting to be rewarded with kindness. This is the way of inviting injury. For Confucius, being impartial or just wrong means to discriminate properly. giving to each his due.
I think the apocrypha, considering this analect, because we did do it a couple weeks ago, I think uprightness can very much go hand in hand with holding up a standard for yourself and the person who injured you. I think that uprightness in that sense can be, as Jesus put it, turning the other cheek in some instances, which is not necessarily to show them kindness right here, but it is to, in sorts, I suppose, be an example to yourself and to that person with your reaction to that injury. And I think uprightness goes along with that. That's just on top of the things we've already discussed. Just a little minor that might hold us.
What does requite mean?
Return. Just look there.
Yeah, we get that.
To me, it's kind of interesting to consider the standard here. You kind of see it as something that is living, even though it is a standard. It has some firmness to it, there's a consistency.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a different response for each and every
Circumstance,
Yeah.
for sure.
But it doesn't mean that the standard is wavering.
It just means it changes how you apply it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm still learning what that means, but it is interesting to see that how intuitive it can be, with the spirit within us, I guess.
Conceptually, I love that because I feel that it feels very true and right, but absolutely practically, I don't know how that looks like at all because I feel like it's so easy to assume the standard in that sense and completely go against it by assuming that your application of it is correct. So I agree with you absolutely conceptually that that's a beautiful living way that standard exercises itself. I just, in terms of practically what that looks like, I agree. I'm still learning that myself.
I think in a sense we can kind of think of it as either like rigid or like more flowing, but I don't think it's either.
Exactly.
It's both in its own way.
Mm-hmm. I would often, I guess it really does depend still, but in my experience with that, the closest I would say I have to a answer is the response that you have. The best one is the one that prioritizes the relationship. I obviously even can sometimes think of customer service at Granny's. Sometimes even though it is not in direct correlation with what has been done before in terms of what we'll do for a customer, sometimes in order to prioritize keeping them as a customer, prioritize the relationship between cafe and customer, you give them what can look like preferential treatment, but is actually doing something that's beyond just a black and white, do this or don't do this. And that's a silly example, but that's just the one that came to mind because I don't get into a lot of fights with people.
I think along the lines of the anti-Laotian verbiage that this particular intellect is both very beatitudinal in relationship to what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount, as well as proverbial, some of the wisdom that is from Solomon. And this is considered to be a Confucian proverb as well, but Jesus. I think that what Jesus teaches can be misconstrued as the original statement here to requite injury with kindness. And I would suggest that there's a difference between kindness and love. Love in its true essence is parallel to uprightness. It's a standard of love. And so, that's one of the, I think, could be easily misinterpreted through Jesus' words, such as you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And then, in other places, eye for an eye, turn the other cheek, that kind of, the turning of the cheek is not, however, a response of kindness. It is holding a place of uprightness.
Mm-hmm.
So the Proverbs, I'm sure there's more reference here, but Proverbs 11:6 says, well, I'm going to correlate uprightness to righteousness. I think it's a pretty short gap there. So verse 5, it says, the righteousness of the blameless makes a straight way for them, but the wicked are brought down by their wickedness. So there are other places where the prophets say, let the righteous continue to be righteous, let the wicked continue to be wicked. But, be found righteous, in right standing with God. So the parallel here is related to the doctrine of the mean and what uprightness really is. And that should not be necessarily misconstrued as kindness in the way that we think about it. And so otherwise, as the commentator says, well, this might be, if you did it this way, then maybe everybody would be injurious just to see if you will reciprocate kindness, and that's the wrong way to draw out something that is more correlated to compassion and looking in. So continuing Proverbs, and then verse 6 says, in 11:6, the righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the unfaithful are trapped by evil desires. The righteous man, verse 8, is rescued from trouble. So there are many references like that in the wisdom literature of the scriptures that set that standard as something that is above kindness itself. It's you're not lowering the bar of what righteousness is when you uphold it. So when you are injured, well, that is no excuse to not do the right thing. That's not an excuse. It doesn't necessarily garner a kind response, but it should always expose the standard. And the way that the standard is exposed is not by imposing it, it's by holding fast to it. It's a pretty big difference there. And so, the master's reply, requite injury with uprightness, kindness with kindness. He puts those on two very different planes of import. One has a greater value and weight than the other, and one is fundamental, the other is almost more reactional. And so, anyway, those are things that are obviously very much embedded in the heart of Scripture as it pertains to how to relate to other people in various types of situations and circumstances. And for kindness, it uses virtue. And even in the original chapter 63 that it mentioned in, however you say that, lousy, it uses the word virtue too. And, huh?
No, go ahead. Sorry. What were you about to say?
No, I was just saying they're actually right next to each other in the appendix, uprightness and virtue. So I was wondering, like, what the, I don't know, if there's a difference between that kindness and virtue, that, or if they are one in this context, and then the difference between that and, because I can see, like, it's a little easier when you think of it as kindness. So maybe it's a translation thing. But then when it's like responding to that with virtue, I just wonder what the difference is.
I think it's it is the same in the English translation, but it says the archaic sense of the word. So I think it's like a different than virtue in that sense. In a way, I think virtue is the uprightness, not necessarily the kindness. Or I would say that uprightness, I suppose, is part of virtue. But in terms of the kindness, I think that's why it was saying that 1433 and 1434 were often paired together, because that's both of those use the archaic sense of death.
Which is kindness.
Yes.
Not
Virtue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a translation thing.
I think it's like the equivalency of like an Old English word that like means something different in Old English than it means today, but just because the word has just changed over time. I think it's a similar thing here. And there's a lot of words like that in Mandarin or whatever this is written in, just because it's such an old language, especially compared to English. So I think they have a lot of words that like not only mean different things based on your pronunciation, but also mean different things based on the time period in which you were saying it.
If you look at the description of the term used early on, it says in that description, virtue in the early Sheng context referred to a kind of attractive, charismatic power residing in a ruler who had won the endorsement of the ancestral spirit. So power endorsement, those sorts of things kind of refer to a favor. And so did as like a verb, yeah, you could say kindness, but it also, you could say it's a showing a favor in a way. Preferment towards something. And that is, I think, even more pointing out the caution that Confucius is applying towards that saying, because you don't want to show that you support a person's way by favoring, or as it's translated here, showing kindness towards their wrong way of doing things. In other places, Confucius multiple times encourages learning to understand another person, learning to love other people, but we're even saying love here does not have merely to do with excusing or permitting, or I guess I should say encouraging or supporting a person's way of doing something. So what we're really looking here, especially along the lines of what my dad was describing as what is the exercise of true love, or staying or remaining upright, adhering to righteousness, is you're looking at a difference between toleration and long suffering. what do you think the real difference is there? Because one who remains true to the standard that their very lives abide by, respond with long suffering. It's the very thing that Jesus encourages when he says some of the things my dad read from the Sermon on the Mount. When your enemy it makes you walk 1 mile, go up 2, those sorts of things. Give him if he takes whatever it is, takes your one article of clothing, then give him your coat. I don't remember exactly what it's worded, but that's showing, that I believe is showing a long suffering, which is different from toleration. Toleration is it's kind of an acquiescence to their manner of doing things. It's an indirect promotion of them, and that's kind of what is warned against at the end of what we read here. For the commentary, the reason that one does not repay injury with kindness, or toleration, or favor, is that where one would do so, then everyone in the world would begin behaving in an injurious fashion, expecting to be rewarded with kindness. That's a pretty broad generalization, obviously, but what I also wanted to get to, because I want to hear some more from you guys about what you think that difference is in practice between long-suffering and toleration. Because long-suffering, remaining true to the right thing, to the right person, to the right way, may actually take the form as what appears to be an undeserved gentleness, an unexpected, sometimes we can see in certain testimonies, an almost inhuman kindness, and like even a sweetness that a person is able to maintain in the face of one's enemy, in such a way that the enemy does not actually, or the injuring person does not feel rewarded at all by their behavior, but actually is their hearts are changed by, their hearts are, as it says in Proverbs, because this is another scripture I had in mind, it's like hot, where live coals are put on their head. Mm-hmm. Their conscience is awoken because of the injured party's adherence to the right thing. Which what I mean to say, that long suffering may often take the form of what seems to be a kind of kindness, a gentleness of sorts. But that's why I'm willing to hear more about what you think that difference is between maybe the better word, toleration and long suffering in practice, and not just as like a concept.
I think, and I appreciate you mentioning what you did, Isaac. I think it actually helped me better understand what's being said here. I think that that response of uprightness is actually, you're doing the same thing, whether or not you're responding to injury or responding to kindness, but it is exercising itself in a different way. What I kind of mean by that, I think, is that when someone responds to you with kindness, when you respond with uprightness, when you respond with the standard, in a way, their adherence to that standard by being kind to someone like you is lifting them up in a way, if that makes sense. I think by living in a way of, with everything you do being led by uprightness and virtue, when others are kind to you, when others are affected by that virtue, it lifts them up when you continue to hold that standard. And meanwhile, when someone shows you injury, when someone is antagonistic towards you, by upholding that rightness, there is no injury you have to repay back. Because like you were saying, that in itself creates a judgment in the inner man, that their own that they do to, like you were saying with the hot coals, that is something that happens internally when you repay injury with uprightness, when you show the standard in face of adversary. I guess I'm trying to figure out how to word it best, but I think by holding the standard in both situations, two different things happen, despite you doing the same action. In all of it, you are practicing uprightness. In all of it, you are practicing virtue. And when you practice virtue to someone else who is virtuous, and I'm using that in this sense, not in the sense we normally think of it, when someone else is like that, it is an uplifting thing. It is something that drags them up with you. But when someone, and simultaneously, honestly, when someone injures you and you respond with uprightness, it also drags them up, but in the terms of a judgment. Because in their inner man, there is that, that's the word I'm struggling for. But I think that also produces something within them. But the reason why I appreciate you saying what you said, Isaac, is because I think that is, in a way, I'm struggling with the words, unfortunately. Maybe somebody else can talk. Maybe somebody else can.
I have a question. Is there a right way to uphold the standard and a wrong way to uphold the standard? In your view, I mean,
I think I would say, if I'm understanding your question right, the right way to uphold the standard is the only true way to uphold standard.
yeah.
I think
There can be an attempt to,
Is that what you're?
if one like, I would think that you can't really uphold the standard in the first place if you don't actually know what the standard is.
Well,
I think I know what you're saying, Andy.
You see what
Go
I'm
ahead. Are you talking about, like, in a way, by like, it's not upholding the standard, but like by trying to hold someone else to that standard, you are casting judgment on them. Like you are taking the one and taking that hot iron and hitting them with it.
There you go.
Yeah, I know
There you go.
exactly. Yeah, I think that.
has anyone? I mean, like in Christianity, right? You see a person who is like, I know God's ways, and I'm gonna make sure that this really comes down on these people.
And I think that therein lies the difference, especially with what even it means to respond to injury with uprightness. When you respond to injury in that way, you are not holding someone else to that standard.
Yeah.
You are holding yourself to a standard when you are met with injury. And so by doing that, if the other person doesn't notice or care for such things, they won't notice or care for such things. But if that person who injured you notices your reaction to that, if they see that uprightness, that in their own inner man creates a judgment that you don't have to do. That is not your work. You know what I mean? I think that is what lies the difference. And that's kind of what I was trying to say, is there's a big difference between like holding someone else to a standard, which we're supposed to do, but not in that. You get what I'm saying. There's a difference, and I think the difference here is you are always holding yourself to that standard, and that is what draws people up or what throws hot coals on their head. It is not a work that you have to go out and be like, okay, well, I'm gonna tell this person that they're not living up in this way, and I'm gonna do this to that. It's an inner thing that you do within yourself, and that those with eyes to see it. I think.
It may or may not have anything to do with how other people receive it. It has everything to do with from what source or from whom, what place does the standard come from. So even in the Analects, the standard is from heaven. And so the determination of the rightness of it is not something that is not measured by how it's received. It's measured by the standard that heaven applies. So that supersedes all other things. Now, indeed, someone may be able to recognize, there are some who can and some who may not recognize as something that is a standard from heaven, but that happens, that doesn't affect the standard at all.
No, it doesn't.
And so, you know, the whole point of uprightness is it's something that is externally applied to. And by externally, I don't mean it stays outside the person, but it doesn't come from the person. It's applied to the person. And the righteousness of God is imputed. So the rightness, the uprightness of the heavenly standard is something that has to be displayed or taught or exemplified before you can rise to it. It's not something that necessarily exists apart from example. It has to be revealed. And so, back to your original question, I think Noah's answer is it can feel a little ethereal, like how do you grasp onto that? But the reality is the right response is the right response. So anything else is just not the right response, because the standard mandates that, not the person. And so, no, in relation to the question that you were asking for additional thought on, that being maybe some further, conversation about what the difference between toleration and long suffering is. To conceptually understand those types of differences, sometimes the most rudimentary examples or illustrations, it will most effectively shine light on the difference. And so, a young child in their toddler stage does a lot of things that are not acceptable behaviorally. Okay? And so, but they are understood in their season of life. And so, the way that a good parent deals with bad behavior is not with toleration, as if the behavior is acceptable, but it is with long suffering. And long suffering holds a standard with a certain kind of application. And I think this ties into your question too, Andy. With a certain type of application of the upholding of that standard. And the application can come in different ways. It can come through very direct measures of discipline, or it can come from the stability of the parent. Their unwillingness to waver based on the response of their child. That doesn't affect them. They don't break their character, their love, or their motivation, or care, oversight, protection, provision for that little person based on their misbehavior. So none of that changes. So that's two different applications of the rod. So maybe helping us understand some of the differentiation between, the staff and the rod. So the staff is leading, so that's the drawing along, the going ahead of, the keeping the path, right, of where you're headed, where you're going, what is provided, where you go. The rod is correction. So it's setting a boundary and drawing you back into the mean. All right. Toleration then is an acceptance that communicates without words that the behavior is acceptable. So almost in the sense of, well, that's not that bad. So we'll let that slide. The other doesn't waver from the standard at all, but it leads or draws along the one who is outside the constraints of that standard, what it represents. And the hope is that there will be a shift there. So, like, coming back to responding to injury with kindness, you're actually lowering the standard. That's toleration. Toleration draws down. The standard always upholds, and because it always upholds, it only can lift up. It never moves itself. It's never drawn down to something below what is set. There's a very big difference between, I'm just opening that up for discussion as one of the big differentiators between long suffering and toleration. So long suffering has a boundary. It's not endless. Okay? It reaches a point where the rod is applied. That's a necessity. So this is, connected to the proverb that says, fathers, do not spare the rod from your children. You uphold the same, but equally it says, do not exasperate your children. So that's the reference to long suffering. Okay? So they're both applied, the standard never changes. And the application of the rod is the upholding of the standard on the boundaries of long suffering.
So there's no way to uphold the standard incorrectly. It's either you uphold it correctly or you don't, or you're not upholding it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there are other sentiments scripturally as it relates to spiritual office and authority. Where Paul, in speaking to the elders or the leaders in the midst of various groups of believers, will say things like, this is a God-appointed position or office in the midst of a people. So there's an operation. There's a you bear the standard. But he says, don't do it in this way. So you can try and maintain the label of the office and administer it in a way that automatically disqualifies the efficacy of the office. Okay? That's a great disparity that we've seen in operation in Christianity for a long time. But how does he say that? He says, don't lord it over others. Don't do it for, selfish gain, and whether that gain is monetary or, relational position or whatever else. He says that's the wrong way to do this. And it's very obvious, like you actually say, when you don't do it that way, well, you're not doing it the way. So there's only one way to do this, and it's not those things. And so it's kind of like truth. There's no such thing as tainted truth. Okay? You don't twist truth. When you twist it, it becomes untruth. It loses what it was. So you don't shift the standard down and say this is just a lesser version of the standards. It is not the standard. That is the upholding righteousness of God. In that sense, this is the true essence of what it is to be upright. There's nothing lesser. It is this. Now, we translate that into certain things legalistically and apply it in ways that are misconstrued. But that, again, that's that little what am I trying to say? Huh?
Dial?
Yeah, well, like you changed it a little bit, right? You've just twisted it just enough to where it works for you. See, that's toleration. That's good enough, right? Let that slide. But you've gone away a bit from the standard, and so nothing less is equal to what doesn't move. God's standards have never moved.
Another thing that I was reminded of, Andy, when you asked that question was something that Jesus said regarding the Pharisees when he warned his disciples to do what they say, but not as they do. Something like that.
Yeah.
If you recall. And that's...
Do what they tell you to do, but don't do what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
In regarding to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
And what that is showing is two different kinds of standards, actually, that the Pharisees don't realize are being demonstrated in their lives in an inharmonious way, basically. So you can see, actually, in the case of the Pharisees, applying principle we've looked at in the Analects, the importance for one's actions and one's words to match, to be one and the same.
Yeah.
And just how consequential it is when they're not. And so you get, that's why they were also called hypocrites. Because what happens is they're able to speak from the law given to the Israelites by God.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, that's the encouragement Jesus has in saying, like, they're able to say things that are worth you doing, but they themselves don't really follow that standard themselves. They don't adhere to or abide by that standard. So don't do as they do. And unfortunately, that is actually the standard that is of most consequence for anyone, is the standard that their lives demonstrate, not their words. And so this is an instance where I think there is kind of a wrong way of upholding a standard. But in a sense, they are still not necessarily upholding that standard as leaders in the midst of God's people, because they don't live by it. They're able to speak about it. That's the case. This is the scenario of a hypocrite. They're able to speak about it, maybe in a way that's even of some benefit to God's people, but they're not able to live according to it. So that's the kind of this kind of hypocrisy is, I think, at least in part, is what Jesus referred to as the yeast of the Pharisees. It's that complete disconnect and lack of alignment in their own lives between the way they live and the things that they verbally confess to. That's huge. That's a huge obstacle, a great danger, and that's obviously one of the earliest examples of what religion looks like today. So you always have to be mindful of the schism that can develop there between what you agree with in your mind, but which your heart is far from. That's what that's what the Lord was saying very early on. They praise me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me.
Yeah. And that's, this draws out the dichotomy between slaves and sons. But a slave operates in such a way that everything has to be applied to them. It's obligatory. So they will do obedience because it's demanded of them. But a son, it's something that's sourced from within them, from the deepest place of identity. And so the sonship in Christ and the formation of the Son, the spirit of sonship within us, this is the essence of what is looked forward to in the new covenant. I will put my law not on a tablet of stone, something that's external, that's apart from me, but I want to put it in you so that it grows within you. So again, when Jesus calls the Pharisees hypocritical, and when he applies the law to himself, he says, I am the law. But that's not an assertion of authority so much as it is an embodiment of a reality. And that's where the people of God always missed historically. The Israelites, those who were the recipients of God's favor in the law, is that they never became it. They never embodied the heart of what that standard represented. So Jesus even said, the law and the prophets can be summed up how? All this stuff is summed up in these two statements. Mm-hmm. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's vertical and horizontal. Mm-hmm. And those are the two planes that Jesus died on as well, to open up this living way that could be sown into man and cause a total renewal so that he could become something that he was destined to be, but was kept out because of, the fall, So it's a pretty vast, wide encompassing subject matter, mm-hmm. When it comes to the I guess the fundamental truths that we're dealing with there.
Yeah, for the standard, I was kind of thinking I don't know, because there's a way with the standard, like you were saying, where there's an understanding there of where that person is, and that's what I was kind of wanting to ask about. Is there's a way to apply that standard that should have some understanding for that person's season of life and where they are. And so, but then there's also toleration, which is trying to meet that person there, I guess. And I'm just thinking very practically, even in certain cafe situations, how do you actually raise someone up to that standard without being so blindly rigid with the standard that it discourages that person? How do you still have understanding for where that person is without toleration?
Mm-hmm. I think it's about holding yourself to that standard, and that is what draws people to it. I don't think we are meant to try and enforce that standard on others. I think that is something that we apply to ourselves, and that is what draws people to it. And I only speak from the experience of having that happen to me. Had anybody here tried to enforce that standard on me, I probably wouldn't be sitting in this chair right now. But by each of you living the way that you did, by my father living the way that he did, I was drawn to that standard. No one tried to put that standard on me. Nobody tried to show me how I was not living up to it. I saw it and I was drawn to it.
I think the environment is pretty important there. Specifically, you mentioned the work environment. There is, let's go to something that's not you have different standards in the kitchen, okay, right? There's food safety standards. So do I show toleration? Nope, not at all. Lay the line out every time. You can get offended, I don't care. It's not even my standard. See what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's no room for toleration there. Attitudinal standard, well, there's still a boundary here. You have an attitude toward me, I can show you long suffering. You have an attitude toward a customer, no long suffering. See what I'm saying? The rod comes in very quickly. So, I'm not saying that was your situation, but if I had someone come in and say, well, then I'm not going to be around you, then leave. Right? Because this isn't the place for you. Right? There are still standards like that apply to a community of believers, regardless of how they might respond to it. But there's still the measurement of, kind of like the initial illustration that I gave about a toddler. Now, again, a toddler is an easy reference because it's a specific age range. that is more understood as childish, but we can be dealing with other people who may or may not have a lot of self-control or have not really learned that this idea of self-discipline and the discipline of the inner man even exists. And so there's a period of time and an environment in which long suffering can be applied. But at the same time, there are boundaries. And so then the rod of correction comes in. Now, when we correct, how do we do it? In love? What does that mean? That we have sweet birds and hearts coming off the tones of voice that we use when we speak correction? Well, those things are mostly flavored by the settlement of our relationship with someone. And so that is why the foundation of relationship has such an important role to play in something. So to use a similar example again, I remember when, I was regularly disciplined and corrected by my own father. But I remember when my parents were away for a couple of days and they had another husband and wife who were believers and, other things, come and take care of my sister and I for a day or two when my parents were out of town. And there was something that I did that I guess this other father thought was unacceptable, and applied something correctionally, discipline-wise to me that was not very well received by me. I felt very alienated by the experience. Didn't make him wrong, but the relationship was not there, so that the rod being applied, the correction being applied, wasn't trusted. So let's use another example. A sheep who knows his shepherd understands the staff and the rod. But the sheep that is new to the fold has not learned that yet, the voice of the shepherd. And maybe not all of the tones of voice of the shepherd. So when you first receive correction, the response is fear and reservation, because you don't know why that was done yet. You have not perceived the benefit of that correction yet. So relationship and familiarity in relationship have a lot to do with the ability. So that's where, someone in a management position needs to work very quickly, not to gain ground with someone. You don't get that. It's something that you earn with others. But the foundation is a relational approach to, how you deal with people's lives. And that very quickly establishes entrustment. And then through entrustment, you can better work with the boundaries of, not toleration, but long suffering and even correction, but never with toleration.
Yeah.
So it's not just a black and white application. It's something that requires some discernment. And the discernment in many ways is both environmental or situational and relational. So it could be that in a cafe experience, you need to bring quick correction to someone that can't handle correction. They may be like, oh, I'm not doing this job. Then you have to say, okay, that's okay. That doesn't mean I change my standard, right? And maybe there's an opportunity afforded to say, here's why. And if they have a hearing ear and a receptive heart, then maybe they can, oh, okay, I understand that now. But some people just simply don't. They may need to venture out in their own way and not have a job for a while and go through a couple other employers and be like, why do I keep getting fired? Or why is it that I can never find a place that likes me?
Well, maybe they can figure that out at some point. That maybe it's not everyone else that's the problem. Maybe you need to look inside. Maybe go back to someone who applied a standard to you and say, "Can I help? Can you help me understand what was going on here?" You know, but that is kind of something that is held within the person. You know, to come to that place. And so, you know, when you guys have come in positions of you know, more servant-like positions in the businesses, those lower level responsibilities, the point isn't, you know, see how much we can take advantage of a young person and see what they'll do. The point is, how well can you learn to work together and receive correction and grow from it? And through that, take on greater responsibility. So there's no toleration there. But the long-suffering aspect is to allow someone to grow up, to grow toward the standard that we hold. Does that help you? Does that help answer your question?
I think a lot of it just requires that environmental and relational discernment on kind of the ground you hold with that person.
Mm-hmm. And those things don't, for any position, guys, those things don't have to be done in, you know, like solo, independent. That's part of why we have the types of conversations that we do, so that we can, and that's where the efficacy of discipleship and the imputation of life and wisdom from an elder into a youngling is having its greatest fruitfulness, measure of fruitfulness, because you can learn through those things. You can query in and then broaden your understanding and expand the capacity and ability that you have to discern. That's a growth thing. And there's always room for teachability. Even among elders, there should always be room for teachability and greater measure of broader spectrum of understanding and a better application of discernment and a more, you know, healthy working out or applying of the standard.
Yeah, we did have reminds me of the employee we had sometime last year. That's immediately what me and Elijah thought of. And he came in and he was kind of what you were mentioning, complaining about all his previous employers and how he was always taken advantage of in all his jobs. And he was kind of having trouble like taking criticism once he got his confidence behind the grill and kind of had some attitude and pride issues. And it is exactly when I sat down with him and like mentioned like, hey, like that's not going to work here. And I did it with a kindness and understanding, but also with like a, you know, there's an expectation for a difference. And then like 2 days later, he came in, handed in his shirt, and moved on. So
yeah. Well, and you should never shy away from the standard in those types of scenarios. You know, like, you know, in the working environment, I think one of the most important things is expectation.
Yep.
So when you hire somebody in specifically in a very critical position like a cook, they need to know in advance that how not just what you expect of them performance-wise, but how you are going to work with them to help them achieve that. And that's going to come through, you know, communication, recommendation, correction, those things. So then they know in advance, this guy he's gonna be talking to me about how I'm doing, right? That is setting an expectation, right?
Yeah.
And that's very helpful, especially when you have a lot of people who have been injured by others or injured by people in positions of authority, to help enable them to receive something good from you.
And that's what I want to kind of learn how to do a little better, is how that expectation is made clear, and then when it directly aligns with the standard isn't coming out of nowhere. You know, the standard isn't something I'm coming up with. It's been the expectation, and that was made clear. And so then for the priesthood, that's the person that's receiving that that standard, it is received much more willingly because the expectation was already there.
That's right. Yeah. And that's, you know, I think Matt probably would know too, you know, that's why companies, you know, show you an employee handbook or a policy and procedure. This is how we do things, right? So you know what the expectation is. And in a sense, you've agreed to that process before you start.
Even just think of what you learned through that one experience, Isaac, right? I mean, that's really where you're going to learn to kind of craft your expectations that you set with people is, you know, certainly you can observe others as they set expectations and how to walk in that. But, you know, as you experience things like you just experienced where you're like, okay, I want to do that a little different next time, right? And here's something I need to look out for in terms of setting an expectation.
Yeah.
I think the heart here too is so important, right? When applying standards, because if there's somebody did something wrong, but they're humble, they're willing to learn, things of that, right? That's a very different situation than what you were just describing, Isaac, in terms of dealing with pride, right? Or somebody who just won't even engage in a conversation about a way to do something different.
So we'll wrap it up today. Naomi, do you want to pray for us?
Lord, we are so thankful for Lord, your way of life and your love towards us. I pray that we would live that out, Lord, in everything that we do and in every relationship, Lord. We would apply, Lord, your way and your love and your truth. Lord, may we be that visible love and light. And may we honor you. Bless each one here today. And may our hearts be right before you, Father. Praise in your name. Amen.